Foros, Crimea, Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, Wednesday, 21 August 1991, 9 a.m. local time. Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev, General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Chairman of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, and Protector of the Realm. Wait, that's not right. Scratch that last part. Who's in the middle of a nice family vacation at his Crimean dacha, when all of a sudden some army generals show up and inform him that the place is surrounded, he is now under house arrest, he may not communicate with the outside world, and moreover, he is no longer the leader of the Soviet Union. Meanwhile, the co-conspirators up in Moscow announced to the nation that Gorbachev's having a bit of a health issue, let's say, and he needs to stand down and take some time off. And then they get down to the work of seizing the organs of state power and replacing Gorbachev's government with a government that's more to the military's liking. And it's an event that's since become known to history as the coup of August 1991, but it wound up being a pretty underwhelming coup, all things considered. The plotters lacked any broad public support, so the thing peters out pretty quickly after a few days with the famous scenes that you may have seen of the shelling of the Defense Ministry building and Yeltsin screaming on top of a tank and all that good stuff. Now, why do I bring this up? Because I'm not entirely sure we didn't just see Joe Biden get Gorbachev. There's a lot of people right now who are unconvinced that Biden isn't either incapacitated, that is to say, more incapacitated than usual, or, in fact, already deceased. And I wouldn't be remiss if I didn't mention the rumors, which are still just rumors at this point, let's be clear on that, but Laura Loomer was the first to report it based on her contacts in the Las Vegas PD, that on Wednesday night in Vegas, Biden suffered either a stroke or a mini-stroke, and they did basically an emergency evac back to the East Coast, during which Air Force One flew well in excess of its normal cruising speed, such that the flight took 30 minutes less than usual. They took him straight to Delaware. He struggled to egress the airplane and ingress the car, and when I say he had trouble ingressing the car, if you haven't seen the video, a Secret Service agent actually has to lift the president's legs into the vehicle. Again, that was last Wednesday night, and we have not seen any evidence of life from Joe Biden since then. On Thursday, they told us he was self-isolating with the China virus, and by Sunday, he was dropping out of the race, whether he knew it or not. All we have is a photograph of a letter that was posted on Twitter. And by yesterday, a lot of people were saying, I think we'd feel better if you could give us some evidence that the man is still among the living. Like, we'd settle for a Polaroid of Joe holding up today's newspaper. And apparently, the questions got loud enough that they did make some effort at that. So on Monday afternoon, in pretty hilarious fashion, they provided something resembling Joe Biden proof of life. But I am saving that for the main segment, so you'll have to stay tuned. Now, suppose you were the White House press secretary, and suppose your boss, the president, just announced, allegedly, that he is standing down for re-election. And suppose this happened on a Sunday. Wouldn't it be kind of a no-brainer that the White House press secretary damn sure better hold a press briefing on Monday morning? And if there was some unforeseeable circumstance where you couldn't do a briefing on Monday morning, the day after the president quit, wouldn't you make extra damn sure you did a briefing on Tuesday morning? Or, alternately, would you just run off to New York to go do a nice softball interview with Joy and Whoopi on The View? Well, that's exactly what our girl Baghdad Buckwheat did, and I think, frankly, I have run out of adjectives to describe the hubris of these people. What sort of press secretary would even contemplate not holding a briefing the day after the president quit? Like, do you actually think going on The View suffices in lieu of being at work doing your damn job? Newsflash, it doesn't. And do you think this is going to make the press corps very happy? You already were kind of on thin ice with those guys, as it was, as I remember. But hey, who the hell am I to lecture the first black, gay, female, lesbian, homosexual woman of color ever to lie badly on behalf of a semi-animated cadaver? From atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where did you ever get the feeling like the pace of events is moving too quickly to keep up with, or is that just me? Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. So Kim Cheadle finally resigned in disgrace earlier today, which anybody who saw or listened to that disastrous, shambolic committee hearing yesterday They had to have known that was sort of the inescapable end result. I did listen to the entire thing, all 6+ hours of it, in fact, and I do have much to say on it, but we are not quite finished with Joe and Kamala yet. Now, I mentioned a moment ago that the White House did, in their own unique way, provide a bit of semi-convincing evidence that Joe Biden does, in fact, continue to reside among the living. But the way they chose to do it, look, I know most of Joe Biden's staffers are young women who think history began in 2004, but come on, man. You need to have some people around you who at least have a broad enough base of recent historical knowledge that they don't turn you into a joking pop cultural reference, which they did to Joe Biden yesterday, when they had him make an audio-only appearance as a disembodied voice coming out of a little speaker box at a Kamala Harris rally. Now, if you're old enough to be watching this channel, then you are probably old enough that you thought the same thing I did. When you imagine an old man speaking to a woman as a disembodied voice through a little speaker box. Charlie's Angels, baby! John Forsyth for the win! And the other thing it made me think of, and which is probably a more fitting reference, right, when you get right down to it, was Howard Hughes and Clifford Irving. Now, for those who may not know the story, Clifford Irving was a investigative reporter / author type who in 1971 announced that he was writing an authorized biography of Howard Hughes. Hughes hadn't been seen or heard from in public for nearly 15 years at that point, since he was, for the second half of his life at least, the most famously reclusive man in American history. And Irving, amazingly, managed to convince a whole bunch of people that this project was actually legit. He produced a bunch of notes and letters and documents that he claimed were written by Hughes. It all looked convincing enough, but eventually, as it starts becoming a bigger news story, word of this thing gets back to Howard Hughes, and he is pissed. So he's got a problem now. He needs to tell the world this Irving guy is a liar and a charlatan whom he's never met nor talked to. But he also doesn't want to give up his status as a recluse, and he damn sure ain't going to appear on camera. So the solution he comes up with is to hold what was probably history's first virtual press conference on Friday, 7 January 1972. He invites 7 reporters from all the biggest outlets to convene in the bungalow of the Hotel Americana in Los Angeles and proceeds to spend 1 hour answering their questions as a disembodied voice coming out of a little speaker box. And whatever 30-year-old female staffer it was who decided to have Joe Biden appear this exact same way, I expect she's never heard of Charlie's Angels or Howard Hughes, or she would have come up with something that was slightly less on the nose. But there's another elephant in the room, too. In 1972, it would have been exceedingly difficult to find a voice actor who could do a credible impersonation of Howard Hughes. In 2024, on the other hand, in the age of AI, it's no problem at all to make a fake recording that sounds exactly like Joe Biden. So I know this was supposed to function as proof of life and lucidity, but I think I'm still not all the way convinced. Now, supposedly, Biden is making his way back to the White House today, and he is going to address the nation from the Oval Office tomorrow evening, or I guess tonight by the time you're watching this. And I guess if the dude had some sort of ischemic event 6 days ago, and it was severe enough to rush him back to the East Coast and sequester him in Rehoboth Beach and lie about him having the coof, and it was severe enough to dispatch Nancy Pelosi up to Delaware to tell him, look, you're just too old and decrepit, Joe. You either need to drop out of the race or we are going to stick that 25th Amendment shiv in your back in the showers tonight when the guards ain't looking. I expect the evidence of that will be pretty hard to hide when they put him back on camera, if they do. And I want to briefly cover one more thing before moving on to Cheadlegate. The next time somebody tries to tell you Donald Trump doesn't know how to play 4D political chess, I want you to laugh at that person good and hard for a nice long time. Because Trump is the guy who just ended Biden before the convention. Let's be clear on that. Trump was not supposed to accept that debate invitation. Actually putting Biden on the debate stage was the last thing his handlers wanted to do. But Trump was on the record as saying, I will debate any place, any time, any channel, any rules. And Biden's people, in the very much mistaken belief that they are more clever than they really are, they said, hey, let's propose such a lopsided set of Biden-favoring debate rules that Trump will never say yes in a million years. That way we can avoid putting Joe on the debate stage, and we can blame it on Trump, and we can call him a liar and a coward. It'll be great. And then, quite unexpectedly, they put the offer to Trump and he says, okay, I'll be there. Because Trump knew that Biden is in such an enfeebled state. He didn't need to defeat him in the debate. He just had to get him on the stage and let dementia do the rest of the work. He knew 90 minutes on the debate stage would spell the end of Joe Biden's political viability for all time. And so it was. 4D checkmate, bitches. Now, to more unsavory matters. If you didn't watch or listen to the Kim Cheadle hearing yesterday in House Oversight, I won't go so far as to say I recommend you go watch it, but I am sure glad that I listened to the entire thing. This was a unique experience in my own living political memory. I have never seen so much bipartisan ecumenicalism in any congressional hearing in my entire natural-born life. The squad members and the rock-ribbed conservatives from AOC to MTG and everybody in between was unified in the firm belief that Kim Cheadle sucks and she needs to resign in disgrace, which she has, of course, now done. And it was an auspicious achievement on Cheadle's part because I don't think the Democrats planned at the start to pile on her like they did. I think this was supposed to go the way these things always go normally. Depending on who the witness is, one party will be trying to make them look good and the other party will be trying to discredit and destroy them. Normally, 99% of the time, if you start listening in the middle of one of these things, you can tell the party of the questioner just by the line of questioning, which you still could do to some extent yesterday, because when the asking of the questions just is a preface for how many times a guy can say AR-15 in a 5-minute period, you can be confident that guy's a Democrat you're listening to. And all the Democrats wanted from Cheadle at the start of this hearing was her endorsement for their dumb gun control monologues. So Congressman such and such does a 2-minute soliloquy on how scary and evil and bad AR-15s are. Then he says, Director Cheadle, would you agree that the number of AR-15s on the street makes your job harder? All she was supposed to do was play along and say yes, and the Dems would have been more than happy to hold her hand and prop her up, and probably, unfortunately, she would still have a job right now. She was given this chance by 3 straight Democrats to play ball and say, oh yes, AR-15s are so bad and evil and they really ought to be banned. But she evidently showed up with a mindset where she simply was not going to give any straight answers to any question from anybody, and by God, she didn't. So the Democrats turned on her. And it happened pretty quickly, but let's not make any mistakes about what really took place here. A lot of people on the right today, people who have probably only seen clips and highlights, have been giving the Democrats credit for asking tough questions, but they only began asking those tough questions after Cheadle refused to play ball with them on the gun control nonsense. The fact they were angry with her had nothing to do with Trump getting shot and nothing to do with the performance of her agency. None of the Democrats on that committee give 2 squirts of piss that Trump got shot. Is it a harsh thing to say? Sure, but the fact of the matter is, when you've spent nearly the past decade smearing a man as a tyrant and an autocrat and an existential threat to democracy and literally Hitler, which is to say, when you've spent this many years trafficking in the sort of rhetoric that gets people shot, I have a hard time believing you are really upset about it when it inevitably happens. And for Cheadle's part, let's just say she gave by far the worst accounting of herself that I have ever seen from an agency head testifying before Congress, which she initially declined to do. By the way, Oversight actually had to subpoena her ass in order to get her to show up and answer questions, which she proceeded to mostly not do. Personally, if I was an agency head and I wanted to keep my job, if I was on the record as saying I have no plans to resign despite my agency's worst operational failure in at least 40 years, if I had 9 days to prepare with the full knowledge that a bad showing would cost me my job, I would not spend those 9 days doing whatever it was Cheadle's been doing for the last 9 days. To call her unprepared is probably a pretty drastic understatement. And there's one thing I want to focus on here, and it's a phrase that has become quite ubiquitous among government officials testifying before Congress. It's that fun little canard, oh, I'm sorry, but I'm not allowed to comment on an ongoing investigation. It's basically become bureaucratic doublespeak for I invoke my Fifth Amendment rights because I don't want to incriminate myself. It's a thing you say when you just don't feel like answering a question. And Cheadle said it a few times yesterday. Only problem is, Secret Service is not a law enforcement agency, nor is it an investigative body. It is just a protective detail. So you don't get to play that card, Kim Cheadle. You don't get to say, sorry, I can't comment on another agency's investigation. I will have to refer you to the FBI. She even amazingly tried to pass it off on the FBI for questions regarding the conduct of her own agency in the minutes and hours and days before the assassination attempt. I mean, really, Kim? I have to go ask the FBI why your agency didn't secure that rooftop? I have to ask the FBI why the Secret Service's security perimeter didn't extend out past slingshot range? I have to ask the FBI why you, the Secret Service director, 9 days later, have not even been to the crime scene? You could hear an audible gasp in the room when that little tidbit came out, and that looks even worse when the members of the Oversight Committee and the members of the Homeland Security Committee have both managed to arrange a field trip up there in the last couple days, and you, the directory of the agent that screwed the pooch, have not. And I forget which member it was. I was only able to listen to it sporadically at some points, but clearly it was a guy who has a bit of experience either in architecture or the building trades, because he, quite reasonably, began asking a few questions about roof pitch. As we know, when she was at the RNC last Tuesday, and why was she going to the RNC instead of the crime scene? That's unclear, but she stated, during the very brief time she answered questions from the press before scurrying away like a thief in the night, that the reason they didn't station anybody on that rooftop was because of the slope of the roof, to use her chosen vernacular. It was so severe as to create a safety issue. So the congressman, I think it might have been Gosar, but I could be wrong, he first reminds Cheadle of that statement. Then he says, we were all just out at the site the day before yesterday. I did a bit of investigating, and you know what I found out? The roof you had your counter sniper team on, that roof has got a 312 pitch, but the building you claimed you couldn't put anybody on because the roof was too slopey, that roof's got a 112 pitch. In fact, it's about the gentlest slope a roof can have without being flat. So what possibly could have possessed Cheadle to give an answer that she knew was a lie and wasn't even a good lie? Unclear. Should she have gone into that hearing fully expecting to be called out on that specific point? Yes. But in the event, she acted completely dumbstruck. Again, no idea what she's been doing this last week and a half, but it definitely was not preparing for this hearing where her job was on the line. What was the best line of the day? Again, I'm not sure who it was because I just had the audio, but it was the guy who closed his time with, I think you should go back to guarding Doritos. Just my compliments to the chef. Well done. And speaking of closing, it is about time for me to do that same thing. But first, I want to remark on one more thing, and it is the extent to which, in the era of DEI hiring, the whole concept of personal accountability seems to have been lost. It used to be a simple fact of life that when you're the head of an agency and the agency fails in a really public and spectacular way, well, you are morally and professionally obliged to resign your post. You don't wait to see if you get fired. You offer your resignation before any other thing happens. This used to be well understood by everyone back in the day when our government was a meritocracy and not just a TV commercial for the United Colors of Benetton. But it's confusing for me how the sense of unwarranted entitlement is so much stronger in people who got their jobs based on their immutable personal characteristics than it is in people who had to earn their spot fair and square on a level playing field. I don't think I have the answer for exactly why that is, but it is something to ponder until next we convene. Thanks very much indeed for watching. Have a great day and a pleasant tomorrow. See you next time. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.